What if Prozd's cow cards were in Magic the Gathering? If you ever seen an ad for Magic the Gathering Arena, you probably know who this guy is. But if you don't, he's a very popular voice actor / YouTuber, best known for his parody videos, and in one of them, he made Cows, a series of Magic the Gathering cards to advertise Magic the Gathering Arena, which made me think, what if his parody cards were in Magic the Gathering? Let's start things off with Formland, a land that taps for mana. What kind? I'm not sure. But if I convert this card, it may become a land card with the effect tap, add 1 colorless mana, or tap, add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast Ox creature spells. The reason why it only gives colorless mana, in addition to 1 mana of any color to Oxes, is because Prozd taps Farmland immediately, and the only way that Farmland can come into play untapped is if it only gives colorless mana generically, as mana fixing cards usually come into play tapped to balance the utility of representing multiple colors at once. I gave it the ability to give 1 mana of any color to cast Oxes, because this deck revolves around different types of Oxes with varying colors, as you'll see later on. Next card up is Dairy Cow, a cow creature with the effect
Dairy Cow is a grazing type.
Converting this card into Magic, it becomes a 1 white cost Ox with 0 attack and 3 toughness, with the effect when Dairy Cow enters the battlefield, place X number of milk counters on Dairy Cow, where X is equal to the number of planes you control. Dairy Cow costs 1 white mana to cast, as in the video, Prozd plays it after tapping only 1 land. It has a white cost since it's a domesticated animal, and oxen usually live in plains or fields. It becomes an ox, since cows and bulls are more generally labeled as oxen in Magic. It has 0 attack and 3 toughness, since it doesn't have any attack, only having value as a blocker. I didn't include the effect to become a grazing type, since it can just be integrated into the Ox creature type for simplicity. It gains counters when it enters the battlefield, since it was shown to gain milk counters when it enters the battlefield, though it needed greenest grass in play to do so. I changed the requirements of how it obtains those counters for another way to generically gain milk counters. And on the topic of milk counters, the next card to be converted is Raging Bull, a bull creature with the effect if Dairy Cow has 5 milk counters, Raging Bull can be played instantly. If this card were in Magic, it would become an 8 cost Ox with 3 red and 5 generic with 5 attack and 2 toughness, and the keyword Haste. This card can attack or use tap abilities the turn they are played, and if you control an Ox creature, you may cast Raging Bull as though it had flash, meaning that this card can be played at any time you could cast an instant spell. This card costs 1 less to cast for each milk counter on Oxes you control. When Raging Bull enters the battlefield, it gains +1/+0 for each milk counter on Oxes you control. This card gains flash, as he said,
I get 5 milk counters on her, which attracts Raging Bull from my hand.
Meaning that it gains flash on the condition that he had an Ox in play, since he needed Dairy Cow on the field in order to resolve the effect. Raging Bull also gains haste, since later in the video he attacks, or rather plans to attack, with Raging Bull on the same turn it was played. Raging Bull has a red cost, since the keyword haste is most commonly associated with red creatures. It has the cost reduction effect, since Dairy Cow having milk counters helped summon this creature. However, it gains its effects based on any oxen you control, and not just Dairy Cow, for much more versatility. It has the attack gain effect, since Raging Bull is supposed to have 10 attack. However, in order to have this card cost single digits of mana while retaining haste, I cut its attack in half with the ability to gain that attack back with 5 mill counters on other Oxes you control. It costs 8 mana since having a high attack value creature with haste is already enough to ramp up the cost of this card, 3 of which are colored to force you into paying at least 3 mana to cast this card, as if you don't know, you can only reduce the generic cost of the card with cost reduction effects unless stated otherwise, meaning you can only reduce this card by 5 mana. While we're still on the topic of mill counters, the next card up is Greenest Grass, a plant grass card, with the effect,
because Dairy Cow is a grazing type and I have Greenest Grass in play, I get 5 milk counters on her.
Converting this card, it would become a 1 white-green hybrid cost enchantment, with the effect, when an Ox enters the battlefield, put a milk counter on it. Hybrid mana, meaning that this card can be paid with either color. This card grants milk counters, as he used this card in conjunction with Dairy Cow to gain milk counters, though I only may grant 1 counter on Oxes you control, since 5 milk counters is a lot, especially since they grant some immense combo potential, as shown later in the video. However, it only costs 1 mana, since it only gives milk counters, which are useless on their own. Greenest Grass has a green cost, since it's literal grass, and a white cost, since it grants milk counters, and to be more easily played with Dairy Cow. Next card up would be Grocery Store, a location store, with the effect,
I can sell the 5 milk counters to the grocery store that I have on my side of the field for 15 dairy dollars.
If this card were in Magic, it would become a 4 generic cost enchantment, with the effect, remove a milk counter on an Ox you control to create 1 dairy dollar, a colorless artifact token, with the effect, tap, sacrifice dairy dollar, gain 2 colorless mana this turn. Spend this mana only to activate an ability or to cast Ox, Cheese, or equipment spells. Cheese being a new creature type he introduced in this video. Grocery Store becomes an enchantment as he never taps this card to create dairy dollars, and it has the cost of removing milk counters on Oxen since he converts milk counters into dairy dollars. I changed the exchange rate since 3 dairy dollars for 1 milk counter is way too much advantage. It costs 4 generic, as if you can keep placing milk counters on Oxen creatures you control, you can make infinite mana. Dairy dollars grants you 2 colorless mana, as
I then convert 15 dairy dollars to 30 mana,
equaling 2 colorless mana per dollar. Dairy dollars have a very specific limitation of activated abilities, Oxes, Cheese, or equipment spells, as later in the video, he plays an equipment, Big Gun, equips it to Raging Bull, and plays a Cheese type card. Oxes are also included, as even though he doesn't play any more Oxes in the video, he probably would later in his 30-minute combo. Circling back, he plays a Big Gun, which becomes a 3-cost artifact equipment with 1 red and 2 generic, with the effect, equipped creature has its power doubled, equipped 1 red and 2 generic. This card becomes an equipment as he equips a Big Gun to Raging Bull. Big Gun becomes a red 3-cost equipment as there's this card called Two-Handed Axe, a 3-cost artifact equipment with the exact same color cost and slightly cheaper equip cost, with the effect, whenever equipped creature attacks, double its power until the end of the turn. Although this doubling effect is weaker, Two-Handed Axe gains the benefit of being an adventure, a subtype of instant or sorcery spells, combined with another permanent card type, i.e. you can cast the instant or sorcery part on the left side of the card first, exile that card, and then cast the permanent part of the card on the right side. And since Big Gun only grants attack and not toughness, it's fine for it to grant a permanent attack boost. The next card we're converting is Tollgates, a gate toll card, With the effect, Block Dairy Driver. If you can't pay the toll, converting this card, it becomes a 2-cost enchantment with 1 white and 1 generic, and the effect, your opponent's activated abilities cost 1 more. Tollgates has a white cost since white is the color known for cards that prevent your opponent from doing certain actions the most, and it costs 2 mana as it only forces your opponent out activated abilities unless they pay 1 more mana. Unlike Suppression Field that affects both players, increasing its activation cost by 2 instead. It prevents activated abilities, since he said,
"How could my dairy driver possibly afford to bring the milk counters to the grocery store?"
They have the ability to force your opponent to pay 1 more mana, as he had 2 Tollgates, as his opponent had 2 Tollgates on the field, negating any advantage you could have gotten from the dairy dollars. The next card to be converted is Cheese Factory, a location factory, with the effect,
It creates 1 cheese per turn.
converting this card, it becomes a 2 generic cost artifact. With the effect, 1 generic, tap. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a cheese from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest at the bottom of your library in any order. Cheese Factory becomes an artifact as he taps it to search for a card. It searches for a cheese creature, as even in the video, he searches the top cards of his deck instead of tutoring out the card, or even conjuring the card into his hand from outside the game. The last card we will be converting is Black Brie, a food cheese, with the effect,
Black Brie gets served and I receive 3 colorless cheese chakra. With 3 colorless cheese chakra, I can tap my cheese factory 3 more times.
with the flavor text, holy converting this card, it would become a 3-cost tribal enchantment cheese with 1 blue and 2 generic, and the effect, Black Brie enters the battlefield with 3 cheese chakra counters on it. 1 blue, XX. Remove a cheese chakra counter from Black Brie. Untap another target non-creature permanent you control with mana value X. Tribal being non-creature spells that gain the listed creature type to increase synergy and consistency from creature support cards. Black Brie becomes a tribal enchantment because he was able to search it off the top of his deck with Cheese Factory. Black Brie has a blue cost, as blue is the color that untaps their cards the most outside of the untap step. Black Brie has a higher generic cost to work with dairy dollars, colorless mana production, as well as the fact that it needs a higher mana cost, as Black Brie doesn't tap itself in order to untap another card. A very important restriction, since it prevents you from untapping too many cards whenever you wanted in a turn. If there's anything I should have changed, or any ideas on cards I should convert next, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, you should check out this one, where I converted Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters into Planeswalkers.
I'm gonna go get lunch. I'll be back in like 30 minutes. Good. That's how long I'll need to set up the cheese tasting phase. Jesus Christ.